And so the divine pilgrimage begins. And just as I'm about to get on the train, I see this. It had me rather excited. 19 years ago, in June 2006, I experienced a spiritual awakening in King's Cross, Sydney. Now, 19 years later, I'm on my way to King's Cross, London, still within the 19-year window. I had to begin here. Platform 9 3/4, the magical portal of our modern age. The queue was outrageous, so this is all we got. But it was enough. The pilgrimage had officially begun. Just after leaving the station, I found something strange on the pavement. A small metal charm with a paperclip threaded through it. I picked it up, examined it. A butcher's knife? Mentally said, nope, not for me, and put it back down. Walked on. Not long later, I sat in a park, slowing the moment down. When I stood up, the exact same knife was there again. This time, no paperclip. I stared at it in disbelief. Okay, this time I kept it. As I walked towards the museum, I found myself absent-mindedly turning it in my pocket. It felt mildly criminal. Why did I have this? When I reached the museum, the queue was over an hour long. I paused. Part of me thought, this is ridiculous. So I stepped away to grab some lunch and go back to the park. On the way, I passed an antiquarian bookshop directly opposite the museum. My eyes landed on a blue book, The Scouring of the White Horse, a book written about the very place I was travelling to the following day, Uffington White Horse. I just stood there, laughing quietly. The museum I came for, and instead, the landscape calling me forward. It felt staged. I took a photo, carried on to the park, sat with my lunch, where I began debating, do I abandon the museum? Or do I honour why I came? I decided to return. I was here to honour John Dee, so back I went. Joined the queue, stood there maybe a minute, and then the announcement came, no more tickets, fully allocated until Wednesday. That was it. The chop was complete. I stepped out of the queue, and this time I didn't feel thwarted. It had landed immediately. The knives were meaningful. The museum was being cut from my path. The first charm had carried a paperclip, binding pages together, a nod to text, to books, something written. Then the paperclip vanished. The cut remained. The book appeared. The museum removed. The message was clean. What felt like resistance shifted into choreography, and just as I surfaced from the underground, I was greeted by this. There's no footage of the overland train to Mortlake. I was completely engrossed watching videos of the sacred objects associated with John Dee. The pentagram sigil, the obsidian mirror, the crystal sphere, the magical disc, the artifacts I had come to see. For a deeper dive into each of these objects and their symbolism, I've written more on Substack. But in that moment, it became clear I didn't actually need to enter the museum. I was being led elsewhere. I arrived at Mortlake, John Dee's old ground. I followed a sign to the Thames path, only to find it flooded and uncrossable. The Thames had breached her banks. There was another sign, dry route during flood, pointing back the way I came, of course. And then I saw them. At first I thought they were ducks, then learned that they were Egyptian geese. Then later discovered they are technically a type of shell duck. That detail alone delighted me. In ancient Egypt, they were associated with creation, the cosmic egg, life emerging from the primordial waters. Egyptian geese in Mortlake. They were introduced to Britain in the century Dee lived through, ornamental, slightly otherworldly presences on the English water. Their timing felt exquisite. I stood there for a while, watching. The Thames, which moments before had been a barrier, began to soften. The water slowly receded. It felt sacred retracing steps on land once walked by Dee, not metaphorically, literally. The same river breathing beside me, the same earth underfoot. I passed the plaque marking his life, paused there, letting the centuries compress into a single quiet moment. Then I approached St. Mary the Virgin Church, stepped through the ancient archway, the oldest remaining part of the grounds, the stone worn by time. And as I crossed that threshold, something shifted. The noise of London fell away. Inside, the stained glass glowed softly. Lights filtered through colour and story. Golden halos everywhere, saints suspended in stillness. It felt less like entering a building and more like entering a held space. John Dee is buried around this part, somewhere beneath these stones. And then I saw him, King Solomon, present at Dee's resting place. Of all figures, of all archetypes, Solomon, the emblem of wisdom, of sacred architecture, of divine consultation. I felt like Dee would love that. And then I noticed something else. The green halo. It stood out, subtle, but unmistakable. There was something about that colour that lingered with me as I stepped back outside, back towards the river, back towards the earth. The Thames flooding had washed away a layer of mud, and there it was, a green marble, over 100 years old, revealed just before I arrived. I can't explain the joy of that moment. It felt like a talisman, a perfect sphere, not unlike the crystal ball associated with Dee, a mirror in miniature, green, luminous in the light. My inner child absolutely leapt. I stood there laughing, and then the thought struck me. For centuries people have said Dee lost his marbles, and here I am, retracing his steps along the Thames, and I find one. I mean, if that's not poetic, I don't know what is. Then the receding tide had revealed a small stretch of foreshore where something caught my eye. A red tassel. I knelt closer and could see a rose. Can you read the golden writing? I picked it up, curious, and beneath it, a golden heart. I made out the inscription to read, "Our love's a classic romance," I knew from the opening line. I was speechless. Given everything, the Venus threads leading up to this pilgrimage, the Venus rose awakening earlier this year, it felt cosmically placed. I stood there in awe, followed by a sigh of contentment. It was time to begin returning home. The journey back was peaceful. I was buoyant after finding the marble and the Valentine bookmark. I paused to watch the train pull away, feeling immense gratitude for what had transpired. So much had gone wrong, and yet every redirection, every pause, had been perfect. That evening, back home, I examined the marble under strong light. It was beautiful, the inclusions, the age. Then I pressed the camera lens directly against it and took a photo. I saw something astonishing. At first, it looked like a comet moving through green space. It made me laugh because this entire new octave of awakening was initiated by a comet, 3i Atlas. But the second shot, this shot, the inclusion, can you see it's making a face? OMG. We're back full circle. It had been a truly marvellous day. Day 1 of the pilgrimage. Day 2 is already in full gallop. Until then, divine love and blessings from one very happy pilgrim.